June 4, 1943. Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas. A pencil trembled slightly as Unaritzia, Vera Burkhardt wrote in his hidden diary, a record that could have earned him solitary confinement if discovered by his superiors. "The Americans must be lying to us," he wrote. No nation could have such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts. Moments earlier, he had looked out the train window and seen something that contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had told them for 3 years. Electric lights glowed from every farmhouse, every shop window, every corner of every street, a constellation of electricity stretching endlessly across the Texas plains. Even at 10 o'clock at night, in Germany, blackout regulations had plunged entire cities into darkness since 1940. Even before the war, only about 20% of rural German homes had electricity. Yet here, in what they had been told was a collapsing and decadent America, power flowed freely, as common as water. That evening, 150 veterans of Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps stepped off a passenger train, not cattle cars or freight wagons, but cushioned Pullman coaches complete with dining and sleeping compartments. The people of Mexia had gathered in large numbers to see the unexpected sight. None of them knew that this moment would mark the beginning of one of the most profound psychological shifts in modern history, a slow, quiet dismantling of Nazi ideology through the visible proof of American industrial might. The mathematics of Allied victory were not written in battle plans, but in production numbers, figures, that would soon shatter every belief these soldiers held about their homeland, their enemies, and their cause. The collapse had started on May 13, 1943. In Tunisia, General Jürgen von Arnim, who had replaced Rommel, surrendered with roughly 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian troops. The figures varied as isolated units continued surrendering over the following days. These were not inexperienced men. They were the Wehrmacht's best desert fighters, soldiers who had driven the British back to Egypt and earned even Field Marshal Montgomery's respect. Yet now they were prisoners. Among them was Hauptmann Friedrich Radke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class and a veteran of the French campaign. He had been wounded twice in North Africa. Decades later, his diary, preserved in the U.S. National Archives, would offer historians an unmatched insight into the psychological transformation that German soldiers experienced under American captivity. At a Campbell soup factory in New Jersey, German prisoners watched a production line that processed more tomatoes in one day than most factories in Germany could manage in a month. The facility ran with a limited crew of women and elderly men, as most younger workers were serving in the military, yet production still surpassed pre-war levels. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Wagner, who had worked in a German food processing plant before the war, recorded the experience in detail. "Everything was automated," he wrote. Electric conveyor belts, automatic fillers, steam cookers handling hundreds of cans at once. One elderly woman managed controls that would have needed 50 workers back home while drinking coffee and listening to the radio. Near Detroit, prisoners assigned to unload coal at a power plant saw the vast scale of American industrial conversion firsthand. Across the river stood the River Rouge complex, employing 100,000 workers producing jeeps, tank engines, and aircraft components. The plant consumed 1.5 million kilowatt-hours of electricity daily, more than the entire city of Hamburg. Oberreiter Franz Kellner wrote, "We could see the parking lots, thousands of cars belonging to workers. In Germany, even officers rarely owned cars. Here, ordinary laborers drove to work. A guard told us some families owned 2 cars, one for work and one for home. We thought he was mocking us. By the winter of 1943, the cumulative effect of these experiences had produced what American intelligence called ideological collapse syndrome. The Special Projects Division, a secret re-education program under the Provost Marshal General's office, reported growing numbers of prisoners requesting access to American newspapers, books, and educational materials. Major Paul Noland, part of the monitoring team, wrote in December 1943, "The prisoners no longer argue when shown production figures. They have seen too much. Even the most loyal Nazis are quiet now. They remain patriotic, but no longer speak of victory. Many openly question what they were told about America." Prisoner-run camp newspapers reflected this change. De Roof, published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, slowly shifted from nationalistic defiance to discussions on democracy, economic reform, and post-war reconstruction. Its editors, carefully chosen anti-Nazi inmates, found an increasingly receptive readership. Lieutenant Hermann Goetz, captured with the 10th Panzer Division, wrote in a letter later cleared by censors, "We were told America was weak, divided and ruled by Jews, incapable of true strength. Every day here proves the opposite. This is the most organized, united and powerful nation on earth. We were fed lies by criminals, one of the strongest. Blows to Nazi ideology came from the Americans' treatment of Italian prisoners after Italy's surrender in September 1943. Italians who agreed to cooperate were placed in service units with higher pay, better food and more freedom. German prisoners watched their former allies work alongside Americans, dine in local restaurants, and even date American women." Hauptmann Friedrich Schulz wrote, "The Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated better than we ever treated them as allies. They earn money, send packages home, and the Americans show them no hatred. This democracy we were told to despise seems more honorable than our own." Christmas of 1943 marked another turning point. American churches, civic organizations and charities sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German prisoners, men who had been fighting against their sons and brothers only months earlier. Each box contained cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Local communities even invited prisoners to Christmas dinners, though most were not permitted to attend. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the Methodist Church Choir performed German carols for the POWs. Women sent homemade cookies and cakes, while Boy Scouts delivered hand-drawn Christmas cards. Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose brother had died in the bombing of Hamburg, wrote, "They know we are their enemies. Many have family members fighting against us, yet they treat us with genuine kindness, not propaganda." What kind of people show compassion to their enemies? Only those fully confident in victory and secure in their strength. The Christmas meal itself was overwhelming. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, vegetables, pies, and ice cream. Quantities of food unseen in Germany since before the First World War. "We ate like kings," recalled Feldwebel Hans Sauer. "Better than generals, better than party officials." And this was not special. The guards said every American family ate the same. If this is how they feed prisoners, what must their soldiers be eating? By early 1944, more than 40,000 German prisoners were participating in educational programs. They studied English, American history, mathematics, and science. The University of Chicago offered correspondence courses, and Stanford University sent lecturers to teach about democracy and economics. The appetite for learning was immense. Prisoners who had been taught that Americans were uncultured were astonished to find libraries filled with millions of books, universities open to all classes, and research that led the world. They read freely from newspapers offering multiple viewpoints, something impossible in Nazi Germany. Hauptmann Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist conscripted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended lectures on atomic theory at Camp Shelby. "American professors, including Jewish refugees, taught us without hatred," he later wrote. They spoke of science as a shared pursuit of humanity. They were years ahead of our research and still shared knowledge with their enemies. Such generosity was beyond our understanding. Camp theaters screened regular Hollywood films rather than propaganda. Prisoners watched Gone with the Wind, seeing in it a story of defeat and recovery that mirrored their own. They saw the grapes of wrath and were astonished that Americans would show their social struggles to their enemies. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote, "They hide nothing, their failures, conflicts, and flaws. Yet their honesty strengthens them. In Germany, such criticism would bring death. Here it is considered patriotic." By spring 1944, prisoner labor programs expanded further as American wartime production reached its peak. German POWs worked in canneries, mills, and fabrication plants, witnessing firsthand the sheer scale of American output. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, prisoners unloaded steel for landing craft destined for D-Day. They watched 20,000 workers, many of them women, assemble 700 boats per month, each requiring 20,000 parts. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann noted, "Women welding hulls, black workers operating machines, teenagers drilling steel. Everything we were told was impossible in a democracy. Yet production never stopped. 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They built more in a month than our Navy did in a year. At Republic Steel in Ohio, prisoners observed the daily production of 10,000 tons of steel. Continuous blast furnaces were supplied by endless trains, carrying ore from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. Oberreiter Paul Hartmann, who had worked at Krupp before the war, wrote, "I thought I understood industry, but this was beyond comprehension. They wasted more steel in spillage than we produced. Their workers complained about overtime, while surpassing our best efforts using forced labor." The summer harvest of 1944 completed the psychological collapse of Nazi propaganda. German prisoners across the Midwest saw farms capable of feeding entire continents. In Kansas, single farms produced more grain than entire German provinces. Combines moved like ships across seas of wheat, harvesting 100 acres a day. Each grain elevator stored more wheat than Germany imported in a year. Unteroffizier Franz Weber, a farmer from East Prussia, wrote, "One American farmer with his machinery does the work of 100 German farmers. They showed me aerial photographs, thousands of square miles of wheat. They could lose half their crop and still feed Europe." In California's Central Valley, prisoners worked in vast orchards stretching beyond sight. They watched as fruit was discarded for the smallest imperfections, fruit that would have been priceless in Germany. Some crops were even destroyed to stabilize prices, a concept incomprehensible to men from a hunger-stricken nation. Gefreiter Otto Schulz recorded simply, "They destroy food to keep prices stable." In Germany, people starve for want of a crust. Here abundance is so great they can afford to waste it. Mountains of oranges were bulldozed into pits because there were simply too many. We begged the guards to let us send them to our families in Germany, but they explained regretfully that it was impossible. The destruction was deliberate, a demonstration of abundance, meant to show that American resources were endless. Then came June 6, 1944. When news of the Normandy invasion reached the camps, it marked the final collapse of German faith in Nazi ideology. The sheer scale of the operation, over 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 men landing in the first wave, revealed a level of organization and power beyond anything the German war machine could match. At Camp Shelby, prisoners watched newsreels of the invasion. Only days later, they saw unending convoys of ships, artificial harbors rising from the sea, and supply lines that delivered 15,000 tons of equipment each day across open beaches. The images were overwhelming. We watched in silence as the homeland we once believed invincible was crushed by the very nation we had been told was too weak to fight. Friedrich von Tauben later wrote, "It was in that moment we knew everything was lost. Not just the war, but the entire Nazi project. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with myths and arrogance. We sent horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their limitless resources. The invasion of Normandy didn't just mark a turning point in the war, it shattered an illusion. For the German prisoners in America, it was the moment they began to realize that the world they had believed in no longer existed. During their captivity, German prisoners encountered something that shook their beliefs even more than America's material power: American humanity. For years, Nazi propaganda had portrayed Americans as weak, sentimental, and morally corrupt. Yet behind the barbed wire, prisoners met people who were strong enough to show compassion without fear of appearing weak. When Sergeant Hans Müller's son was killed in the Hamburg bombings, the American camp commander personally delivered the Red Cross message and expressed his condolences. When Lieutenant Paul Fisher's wife wrote that she could barely feed their children, American church groups sent food packages to her, to a civilian family in a country the US was still bombing. Prisoners were astonished. As one wrote, "They separated the German people from the Nazi regime. They told us they were fighting Hitler, not Germans." What once sounded like propaganda turned out to be true. The Americans weren't preparing to destroy Germany. They were preparing its people to rebuild it. Medical treatment in the camps left a deep impression. German doctors worked alongside American medical staff, learning new techniques and using equipment more advanced than anything available back home. Prisoners received surgeries that, in Germany, would have been reserved for the wealthy or military elite. Perhaps most remarkable was the attention to mental health, something virtually unknown in the Wehrmacht. Soldiers suffering from trauma were treated with counseling instead of punishment. Those who attempted suicide were offered therapy, not discipline. Dr. Friedrich Bauer later wrote, "They treated despair with understanding, not brutality." This kindness toward enemies revealed a kind of strength we never understood, the calm confidence of true power. By March 1945, the American re-education program had begun showing striking results. Over 25,000 prisoners volunteered for democracy classes. Camp newspapers printed articles on constitutional government, free markets, and civil rights. Discussion groups debated how Germany should be rebuilt after the war. Fanatical Nazis who had arrived in the camps full of hatred were now writing essays on democracy. Officers who once swore loyalty to Hitler began planning how to use American agricultural methods to feed post-war Germany. As one former officer, August Hermann Göring, no relation to the Reich Marshal, said in a 1975 interview, "We became missionaries for democracy, not through propaganda or pressure, but through experience. We saw it work. We saw ordinary people living better than the German aristocracy. We wanted that for Germany." The transformation was so profound that American officials began to worry some prisoners were becoming too enthusiastic. Many requested to stay in the US after the war. While others fell in love with American women they met through camp correspondence programs. Thousands would later immigrate permanently in the 1950s. For the German prisoners of war, captivity in America became more than imprisonment. It became an education in freedom. April 1945 brought the final revelation. As Allied forces liberated the concentration camps in Germany, the shocking images were shown to the German prisoners in America. At first, many refused to believe what they saw. They insisted it was propaganda. Enemy lies meant to humiliate them. But as the evidence mounted, testimonies from American soldiers, photographs, film footage, and letters from home confirming the horrors, denial became impossible. The psychological impact was devastating. For men who had clung to a sense of German honor despite military defeat, this was a moral collapse, far deeper than the loss of war. Everything they had believed in, the ideals they had fought and suffered for, was revealed as monstrous. One prisoner, Feldmann Walter Schmidt, later wrote, "We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples. We learned that we were the barbarians, the Americans, whom they had once mocked as weak and decadent, now stood as examples of what true civilization meant." By May 1945, as the war finally ended, German prisoners faced repatriation with mixed emotions. They had witnessed an America that contradicted every image they had been taught to believe. In captivity, they had eaten better than they had as soldiers. They had been treated with more dignity by their enemies than by their own commanders. The last months in the camps were spent preparing for their return to a destroyed homeland. American authorities organized vocational and agricultural training, as well as lessons in democracy and civic responsibility. Prisoners were taught about the principles that would soon guide Europe's recovery, even before the Marshall Plan was officially announced. As Friedrich von Tauben wrote, "They prepared us to rebuild, not to surrender. They gave us skills, knowledge, and hope. They turned defeated soldiers into future citizens." This generosity was incomprehensible to men raised under a system built on cruelty and revenge. Yet between 1945 and 1946, more than 370,000 German prisoners were sent home from American camps, back to a nation divided, destroyed and hungry, but they carried something precious with them, a first-hand understanding of how a free, industrial society could function. They had seen it work, not through lectures or propaganda, but through experience. And when they returned, they would carry those lessons into the heart of a broken Germany.